everybody. Welcome to Common Censored. I am Lee Camp, joined by Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
And this is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other shit.
And sometimes other shit as well. Let's dive into it. And thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. We always appreciate it. But so let's talk for a minute. I'm not going to spend a half hour on it. Let's talk for a minute about what's going on with Russia, the U.S., and Ukraine. I'm going to dig into it more with Ben Norton on Redacted Tonight VIP this week. So if this little teaser whets your appetite, is that the expression?
I think that's a mixed metaphor, but that's fine.
wets your something. If this wets your genital area and you'd like more, then check out that interview with Ben Norton. But so I'm trying to, of all the points there are to make around this, what's going on right now in Ukraine, I'm trying to decide what are the most important that are kind of the most ignored, because larger issues and some of the stuff, about the oil pipeline, et cetera, hopefully a lot of people have already been learning that. But here's what I think is perhaps one of the most redacted angles for Americans. I think Russians probably have a pretty good grasp of this. But Ukraine in general was basically considered part, was part of the Soviet Union, right? So you have this massive country or whatever you want to call it, union, that it is part of. Then when the Soviet Union falls in 91 and the U.S. puts, our guy in Moscow in there, Yeltsin, the U.S. begins the work of trying to kind of pull away any former Soviet bloc areas and kind of balkanize Russia, to slowly break up Russia so that it's never a threat to us. But then, as we know, Russia has become fairly formidable again, and it pushes back. And Ukraine is not one people. Ukraine is a lot of different people. Some of them, particularly many of those in the Donbass region, which is what the area that Putin has just declared independent, consider themselves more Russian than Ukrainian. And many of them speak Russian as their main language, and they don't consider themselves to be Ukrainian over Russian. And right now, so we look at this, and the way the mainstream media propaganda has dealt with it is, this all happened last week or this week. Oh my goodness, Putin decided to invade Ukraine. Oh! And it's like, actually, what's been going on has been going on since at least 2014, obviously in smaller ways even before that. In 2014, U.S.-backed coup, U.S. helps create a coup in Ukraine that is basically a Nazi-linked right-wing coup to take over Ukraine and put in a U.S.-friendly government. So we still have a U.S.-friendly government, even if Zelensky is a little less U.S. lover, maybe slightly, than the previous president. But so we created this coup, put in Nazi-linked people. We funded and armed Nazis. I've done segments on that before, so I'm not going to get into that right now. On that border in that region, the Donbass region, which has millions of people in it. But so now that there's been fighting going on since. We're talking 8 years of fighting.
That was not discussed in the corporate media at all. And I think, just real quick, I think it's important to highlight that this is like literally a Nazi government, and the Russians lost more than 20 million people in World War II to the Nazis and fought hardest, arguably, against the Nazis of all of the Allied powers. And now, thanks to the United States, there are actual Nazis again at their border.
With some of them have swastikas on their helmets. This is not
right. No, I'm not saying Nazi as in they're right winger. No, actual Nazis. And so I think it's really important to highlight this, that World War II would not have been won were it not for Russia. And now we are the United States is pushing Nazis towards the Russian border.
Along with NATO. I'm not going to get into the NATO thing right now because I'll do that more in that interview. But so yes, you're absolutely right. And so this fighting has gone on in the Donbass region for 8 years. The number of so there's been a supposed ceasefire since not since 2014, but for several years now. But the ceasefire is violated constantly. The average shelling per day was over 200 violations of the ceasefire.
It's not really a ceasefire. Then.
Yeah, not really a ceasefire. And then recently, it's gotten into the over like 1,000 a day of violating the ceasefire. So Russia has basically been pushed through this and the NATO and the sending Javelin missiles and all this shit the U.S. has been doing on their border, keep in mind it's on their border, to basically eventually do something. It's like they in many ways they've been pushed to do this by the U.S. and others. But I want to read you, just to give you a little more idea of this. And I don't claim to be an expert on this. A lot of this I'm just learning, but these are a lot of important points that are left out of the mainstream media intentionally because they don't want you to know this side of it. So this is an interview that it was on Popular Resistance, a great outlet, and it's an interview with one of the refugees, tens of thousands, roughly 70,000 already, refugees have left the Donbass region to Russia. And when asked, so a reporter for one of these alternative outlets got on the bus and said, how many of you are Russian citizens, meaning you have Russian passports? 50% raised their hands. Many of them are Russians.
Right.
So it's
not just that they feel Russian, they are actually considered Russian citizens.
Yeah. So then the interviewer talks to one older man, and he says to him, what would you... So this is a refugee trying to get out of the Donbass region, but they all want to go home. They don't want to leave their homes forever. They want to go back into that region, but they want it to be part of Russia or at the very least, stable, no longer being shelled by Ukrainian Nazi forces. So the older man named Oleg says, I want Russia to just take us in. I was born and grew up in... Komsomolsk. I don't know how to pronounce that. We didn't even know where the border was. And I found this part really interesting. We didn't even know where the border was with Russia. It didn't matter. I served in the Russian army at the time. And then he goes on to say, we were one nation without borders. We married each other. We were interconnected in so many ways. And then all of a sudden, they mark a border and separate us. And then after a certain amount of time, we started to realize that the border really does exist. Like at first, I guess he's saying it didn't matter that much. Okay, you think there's a border there? We don't care. My cousins are on the other side of it. It doesn't matter. But eventually it started to matter. And then things just started getting, this is to go back to the quote, and then things started getting worse and worse. Do you understand? And now, what do we have now? It's been 8 years. He means 8 years of war since 2014, the U.S.-backed coup. All of our plans in the future have been destroyed. Everyone's plans. People are just worn out. They have no money, no job, and now it's starting all over again, meaning similar to the coup in 2014. In other words, everything blowing up all over again, and you don't know where, well, that's where I cut off the quote. But you don't know where to go is basically what he says. But you get the point that these borders are fucking... these are imperial powers, the U.S., Russia, etc., that have instituted these borders, and the people are like, yeah, these borders don't mean anything to us. My family's on the other side of it. It reminds me of the 1855 Berlin Conference, where a bunch of white nations got together, white oligarchs got together, and decided, here are the nations of Africa.
Right.
And they just cut through tribes. They connected tribes that
had nothing to do with each
that
other.
were warring with each other. Like,
right.
It's just insanity to put these national borders on top of people's. And
borders are completely arbitrary and always violent. The act of splitting something for the sake of nation building is always a violent act. And, just looking at the U.S., of course, I mean, just look at all the indigenous peoples that were sliced and diced for the sake of the U.S. empire. So what's happening in Ukraine is obviously not. I'm not trying to compare it to the lived experiences of indigenous people here or in Africa, but just the concept of this border and how it becomes more and more militarized because of these proxy wars. Basically, I mean, the U.S. has nothing to fucking do with Ukraine or Russia, and yet it is shoving itself into these borderlands in an increasingly more and more violent way, and then acts, horrified when Russia, I would say, honestly, pretty gently pushes back. And if you look, I know that we're not going to get into the NATO morass, but if you look at maps of how NATO was first instituted and promised, like on paper, not to encroach on Russia anymore, and then you look at where NATO is now, it's like it's literally it's become a stranglehold around the entire nation of Russia, even though it promised that it wouldn't. So these are all things that are completely lacking in the reporting that happens in the U.S. and I'd say in most of Europe. I mean, I listen to Swedish media, and Sweden Sweden has been anti-Russia since like 1200, but
old school anti-Russia.
They're OG anti-Russia, but like the amount of NATO ass licking, even though Sweden's not part of NATO, and the amount of like anti-Russian propaganda that completely misses this important history of the Donbass region, of U.S. imperialism and violence. I mean, this is giving people a completely warped perspective. So as even people on the left, like, you know, friends of mine that I've had this conversation with are like, but isn't Russia the aggressor? And I'm like, no. And look, fuck, Putin's a dick. This is not about whether you like the ruling elite of any particular nation. It's about whether the U.S. has a right to dictate Russian policy and Ukrainian policy, and whether it has the right to topple governments and install literal Nazis in their stead. And I would say no.
And I just want to conclude with an analogy that is not a perfect analogy. I will readily admit that, but I'm trying to come up with something that would be kind of similar. This isn't too far off from if Russia created a war pact, a military pact with nations around the U.S. So like Mexico, Canada, both joined the Russian military pact. Cuba, other countries nearby joined this Russian military pact, and then they start moving, bases and missiles closer to the border, like the Mexican-U.S. border. And then they declare that, Texas declares independence from the United States, and the Russian military pact and, the Russian allies in Mexico then help create a Russian-backed coup to put in Russian favorable government in Texas. And then the U.S. was like, yeah, so how long should we sit here before we do something? I mean, it has a lot of similarities to it. Like that analogy is not too far off from like how far do you expect this massive country to sit there and just be like, oh, that's interesting. They're right on our border. Oh, that's interesting. They have missiles pointed at us that are 2 minutes away. Oh, that's interesting. They just took away our some more land.
And that, like, historically, it would be like if the U.S. had helped Russia win a massive war, killing off like millions of Americans in the process, and then Russia, right after the war ends, is like, you know what? Fuck you, and we are going to enter into this Cold War that at many times was not very cold.
And we're going to use a nuclear bomb on China just to show you we can.
So, you mean Japan?
Japan, sorry. Yeah.
I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. A couple of nukes just to show Russia we mean business.
Right, exactly. So yeah, important to get the larger frame of this story, because the frame that is being shared in the U.S. and Europe right now is highly distorted.
So, more on that on Redacted VIP if you want it, but let's
out.
Move on to more topics.
Also, if you want to hear more from Ben Norton after you watch Lee's interview with him, you can check out the Project Censored radio show, which I am now a co-host of.
Everyone should check out Project Censored. I don't know how we all ended up on the Ben Norton train this week. That was kind of accidental, but
because he's rad.
He is rad. But yeah, everyone should check out another podcast, Project Censored.
Yes, and you can find that over at radindiemedia.com.
Eleanor hosts all podcasts with censored in the title.
If you're starting one, please contact me about co-hosting.
She also hosts Tote Bags Censored. These are tote bags that are not allowed out on the streets.
So we move on from Ukraine to New York City, where there's so many expletives that are just moving through my brain right now. Eric Adams, the new mayor of New York, he's just been like butt scooting down the human decency line since he came into office.
I mean, he's a former cop, so how
Yeah,
decent could he
I
be?
mean, what do you expect, really? But his administration announced that they will be removing homeless people from the subways at night. Quote, no more just doing whatever you want, which I don't know what the fuck that means.
Well, I love that because that's like, homeless people always just having a blast doing what they want.
I know, right?
I believe people end up sleeping on a bench in the subway when all fucking shit in their life has gone sideways. It's not
I'm
like
pretty
a
sure that's
choice.
not like whatever you wanted to do. Quote, those days are over. Swipe your Metro card, ride the system, and get off at your destination. So, a lot of things wrong with this fucking sentence.
Oh my God.
First of all, you don't have a destination if you're home. That's the whole fucking point, you asshole. Unless you're going to a place to try to access services or try to access food or
he's
a
trying
job
to
interview or
say
whatever
that
the fuck. You don't have a fucking destination.
Right, but he's trying to say those without a destination should not be in our subways.
Of course.
Keep the gross people out.
Of course, that's what he's saying. And this just speaks to the larger paradigm, which I'm sure folks have seen this, the anti-homeless architecture that's out there, like benches that you see in a park that for some reason just have like an extra armrest in the middle for no fucking reason.
Or my favorite is the ones near the apartment I used to live in. There was a little tiny park and it had like 3 or 4 benches and they were all at a slant, like towards the ground, so that you could lean on them but not sit on them. Like you basically could not pull your feet off the ground. You had to hold yourself onto them.
Which would not even be nice. Like, I'm not homeless, but I can't use that fucking bench now to like sit and read a book.
No,
so,
it's meant to be like a 3-minute max bench.
It's for no one. I mean, could you even call it a bench if you can't fucking sit on it? It's a lean. It's a.
Hey, you want to go chill out on a lean in the park?
And like the spikes and the other things like that basically make it impossible for
There's
a
a name
homeless
for it. It's
person.
like discomfort architecture or something.
That basically make it impossible for someone who's unhoused to even rest there. And the whole idea of this, and the sweeps of of encampments, and literally busing unhoused people to different cities, is to ensure that they are out of sight and obviously out of mind, because they're always out of mind in terms of how to address the situation in a humane way.
And not so long ago, you were at an encampment here in D.C. that was being bulldozed.
Yeah, and actually a man was bulldozed while he was in his tent.
He survived, but
that's how desperately the city of D.C. wanted to make sure that these people got out of the way. And looming over this encampment were literally, I'm not exaggerating, and you can see a picture of it in the article that I wrote for Mint Press News. There are 2 city blocks of new luxury apartments being built. That's literally what was looming over this encampment.
So I wonder why they wanted to remove this particular encampment.
Right. But it's the same thing with the subway. It's like, we don't want to we don't want to have to be confronted with the realities of our horrific capitalist system that requires people to be this poor, that requires people to be this oppressed. We don't want to have to be confronted with that. So what are we going to do? We're going to continuously push them out of view. Of course, the problem is that as we continue down this path, more and more people are unhoused, particularly after COVID, where something like 20% of all households in the United States lost their life savings. Like, there's just too many fucking people who are too destitute to hide. There's nowhere to fucking put them. And so this move by the mayor...
There is if we use the 17 million empty living spaces in the country, but yeah.
Touché.
I get what you're saying.
And, like in particular New York, like for anybody who, either remembers New York back, maybe 20, 30 years ago, even just in that span of time, Manhattan, it has turned into like a ghost town. So like, especially if you get closer to like Central Park and things like that, there are very few people who comparatively, it's not like, 2 people, but comparatively, there are few people who live there. Why? Because nobody can fucking afford it.
Well,
and the people who can afford it are typically buying these homes as second or third or fourth homes that sit empty. And so an astonishing amount of homes and apartments are empty in the island of Manhattan, which is one of the boroughs in New York City, are empty. And you could easily fucking put people there, or I don't know, lower the rent so that people who work in Manhattan can actually afford to live there.
Or you could have laws that you had to be in an apartment for a large percentage of the year, or else you no longer own it.
Right.
But yeah, I lived in New York for 12 years, and especially down by like Wall Street and those areas, and even today, like the East Village and the West Village, well, more so the West Village, no one can afford to live there unless they're rich. But there aren't that many, multi-millionaires that want to live there year round. So they buy the apartments and they're just not in them. So a lot of the town is just empty, but what people do is they commute in an hour to work at the coffee shops and stuff.
Right.
And there's plenty, non-pandemic times, there's plenty of tourists walking around too. So places look fairly, there's a lot of people walking around, but no one can afford to actually live there.
Yeah. And so this new announcement by the mayor comes with it, of course, the violent arm of the state, which is the NYPD, which is, by the way, like bigger than a lot of armies across the world. They have been given, quote, a clear mandate to enforce the subway's rules of conduct, which include prohibitions against lying down. Mm-hmm. And basically the NYPD officers are going to undergo additional training, I wonder how much that will cost, on enforcing the rules of conduct. And the city said that officers will be stationed at the end of subway lines where all passengers will be required to leave the train.
And back when I was researching prisons in this country, one of the things I learned is that in New York City and other big cities, often 50% or over 50% of those who cycle in and out of prison regularly are homeless. So basically it's just, that's our way of treating homeless, is to arrest them and put them in prison. And they often can't get out, or things happen in prison that keep them in longer. And
yeah, absolutely. And, this way of dealing with homelessness we already know how this is going to turn out. It's going to cause more people to be violently affected by the state. It's going to cause more violence, which is ironically what, they always claim that they're trying to address. Mayor Adams said that he wants to stop the violence on the subways. Okay, then don't be violent on the subways, you piece of shit. Because obviously the NYPD are going to be violently removing people from the subways that are there, by the way, particularly in the winter, so that they fucking survive.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you've ever had to sleep outside when it's below zero. People die, obviously. And so where do you go? If your city has a subway system, you fucking go into the subway system.
Right. It's
survive.
literally survival technique. Like, it's so insane. I mean, seriously, like, everybody you see sleeping in the subway, things are not easy or good for them. It's a fucked up system that puts people out there like that. And this fucking idiot thinks that the answer is just to like arrest people or have a cop go and hit them on the head till they leave the subway. It's just, it's inhumane. It's a crime against human rights. It's fucking pathetic. And of course, this is how the capitalist machine works. These people have been destroyed and exploited and extracted to the nth degree. And now they've got nothing left. And so they're trying to survive the only way they know how. And we think the answer, rather than changing the economic system, is to send cops after them.
Right. And instead of ensuring that they have homes, you shuffle them from the makeshift places that they can sleep and stay warm and survive. So fuck Eric Adams. And for folks who are organizing around unhoused issues, this is atrocious news, but it's also not surprising. And the battles continue to find more tactics and ways to address this, whether that be squatting, whether that be, trying to figure out more permanent options for these folks. And
why is he doing this? He's doing it because he knows that the voters, the people that put him into office, are not the homeless. And so if they notice that the subways seem a little cleaner and the homeless people are out of sight, out of mind, then he's more likely to get reelected.
Yep. As Emma Goldman said, if voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. All right, moving on. Speaking of assholes in office, this is a report that came from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, from February 16th. U.S. crude oil production forecast to rise in 2022 and 2023 to record high levels.
We're number one.
Because Biden is the climate president, right? Am I right? Yeah.
I know. We got it. Well, listen, folks. Everyone's got to vote for Biden because he's going to do something about climate change.
He's going to get us to the point of no return faster.
No.
You have a joke about that, don't you?
Yeah, I hardly remember it, but yeah, something about speeding up our race to the point of no return.
Go check out Lee's comedy special, and you'll get it. I'm not going to try to say it because I will fuck it up. So basically, the short-term energy outlook, also known as STEO, has forecasted that crude oil prices will remain high enough to drive U.S. crude oil production to record high levels in 2023, reaching a forecasted 12.6 million barrels per day.
And by the way, the U.S. is now a exporter of fossil fuels, meaning we're making money from fracking and et cetera. And so it is in our benefit to keep fossil fuel use going globally now because it's good for America's economy to export gas. Also shutting down Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was going to supply Germany with the gas that they wanted. That's good for U.S. fuel as well. So U.S. very excited to send the planet to its death, into its death spiral a little quicker.
Yeah, and so we've talked about this on the show before, but really important to recognize that the Democrats are not stopping this. They're promoting this, that Biden actually was the president who opened up the largest swath of acreage in the Gulf of Mexico to oil and gas exploration. That's 80 million acres. It's the largest lease sale ever.
And it was overturned.
A judge has reversed that, but then the administration can still overturn that, or like they can basically appeal. So we're waiting to see what happens there. But it was Biden who opened up those 80 million acres, the largest ever. So again, like I just said, if voting changed anything, they'd make it fucking illegal. Biden doesn't give a shit.
And even the Washington Post reported that he's allowing more drilling by like a third than Trump did.
And if the Washington Post is reporting that, you know some shit is up. So moving on, Starbucks, friends don't let friends buy Starbucks. Starbucks has launched an anti-union website, which is reminiscent of what Amazon did, right?
Yeah, Amazon had one, right?
Yeah. No, it's a
Do they have T-shirts? Do they have merch? Because I want some merch.
It's a common ploy that these big corporations do by trying to tie...
I don't know where the beeping's coming from.
It's coming from a garbage truck. And so this is a common ploy. I don't know why that garbage truck has to back up this much, though. That's concerning.
It's just good. It's going to hit our building any minute.
So this is a common tactic that big corporations use in order to battle unions. They try and cast it as, oh my gosh, your hard-earned money is going to go to union dues, and then how are you going to afford things? And it's you could just pay us more, you piece of shit.
There was a Delta sign
that
said, "Don't pay union dues. You could get a Sega Genesis or whatever,
for whatever the $200,
whatever
the
new."
Yeah.
I think I just named a game system that hasn't been in action since the 90s. But still, you could get a PlayStation or something with your membership dues. And it was like, dude, what do unions do? They get you higher pay.
I know.
So you make money.
So you could still buy that stupid whatever Nintendo. I don't know anything about video games, but whatever the fuck. But of course, that, this is a common rhetoric, and Starbucks has their rhetoric on this website is very like buddy buddy. It's like we're all in this together bullshit.
We're all stepping on your colleagues' throats together.
Well, and it calls the workers the partners. They're our partners, and it's like, really? You pay your partners starvation wages and force them to work in terrible conditions?
Well, that's one of the classic corporate terminology shifts. We won't pay you people anymore, but we'll start calling you partners.
Right.
We won't pay you anymore, but we'll start calling you colleagues and whatever bullshit terms they come up with.
So, basically, that the Starbucks' argument is that workers are hearing from all of these evil union organizers, and they quote the workers should also quote hear from us too. And it's like, has any worker ever not heard from their boss? Like, what do you mean hear from us too? You are the corporate overlord of these workers that are being oppressed and taken advantage of. I think we know your stance.
We've heard from you. Yeah.
And so this is all part of the continued push, particularly as Starbucks workers have been unionizing across the country. So this is really a powerful movement that's popping off all over. That's really threatening the picture perfect corporate outlook that Starbucks always puts the fucking gay pride flags out. They put out the Black Lives Matter flag and all of this shit. But of course, at the core, they are yet another extractive, oppressive corporation.
They can't be bad if they have Christmas-style cups and pumpkin spice.
Pumpkin spice, that'll save the day. What was the one that was like a few years ago, like the fucking unicorn latte or something?
Oh, yeah.
It was like rainbow colored. And
that when people started interviewing the employees, they said it was a fucking disaster to make that thing. They dyed all their fingers. Like, it was just awful, but every kid was like, I want a unicorn frappuccino. Which, anyway, so, and Starbucks has been... The toughest part was blending the unicorns.
It always is. That horn just won't fucking...
No, getting the horn in the fucking bucket.
Starbucks has been embroiled in a lot of anti-union and anti-worker practices. The National Labor Relations Board ruled that Starbucks last June had unlawfully retaliated against 2 Philadelphia baristas who had been working to unionize their location. And these kind of instances that we've seen with the likes of Amazon as well, right? Like paying basically Pinkertons, the modern version of Pinkertons, like up to $10,000 a day just to union bust. And it's like, you could use that $10,000 a day to like pay people more, and you wouldn't even have this problem. You absolute psycho.
Well, the reason they're willing to pay so much money to stop people from getting a slight raise is because they're afraid this might put an idea in their head. We unite and we can create change, and so therefore they're willing to pay crazy amounts of money to stop small raises, small benefits.
Yeah. So the push to unionize more and more Starbucks locations is continuing, and a lot of Starbucks workers are getting wise or are educating each other about the tactics that are used. We already mentioned the corporations highlighting the fact that, oh my God, you have to pay union dues and shit like that, and that unions are somehow anti-worker, which is of course the exact opposite of reality. So this is an important fight to keep your eyes on. You can read more about the ongoing fight to unionize Starbucks locations. There's an article in Left Voice that I'm pulling from here. It's from February 15th, and there's a lot of more information about the ongoing fight there. But I'd say, me being like the little what's the word?
I don't know. Pixie?
Yes, the little, like the workplace organizing pixie. If I went to Starbucks, which I don't, but if I did, I would maybe like slip in a little zine about workplace organizing when I hand my credit card to pay for my latte or whatever the fuck you get there.
Or you don't even have to hand it to me. You just leave it around, and then when they're cleaning up, they find it.
Like where they put they don't sell CDs anymore, do they? But where...
I don't think so. I can't imagine a lot of CD sales are going on in there. But
that's the last time that I frequented a Starbucks.
It's actually
just
CDs. It's actually just Michael Bublé himself is standing in the Starbucks now, just singing to you.
So yeah, just throwing that out there as a possible. So
yeah, this is. Eleanor has not been eager to make the shift to some modern technologies. So, for example, someone gave her a Kindle, and so she read the one book on that Kindle, then put the Kindle on the bookshelf as if it was a book she had finished.
Okay,
so
you know what?
I have finished this Kindle book, and I will now put it on the bookshelf where it sat for a year.
Well, I didn't enjoy reading on the Kindle. I want to underline.
I think she thought you had to get a different Kindle for each book.
Okay, I did not. But you do have to charge it. You don't ever have to charge a book, do you guys? No, you don't.
She underlined in Sharpie on the screen, which ruined it.
Then, like, the next page, all of the wrong parts were underlined.
Right.
It was awful. So, moving on to another... horrifying story. I'm sorry, I'm not the good news pixie. I might be the union pixie, but I'm certainly not the good news pixie this week. This is an article by Alan McLeod.
Well, I guess we could have phrased the Starbucks one differently. Starbucks employees continue to try to unionize despite Starbucks' efforts to destroy them.
There you go.
So there's the positive news.
There you go.
Yeah, you just got to rephrase.
And Lee is the rephrasing pixie. So this reporting is by Alan McLeod, who's a great investigative journalist that works with Mint Press News. I also interviewed him on Project Censored Radio a couple weeks ago, so please check that out. So 1 in 3 big defense contractors profit from U.S. prisoner suffering. And I felt this was also important to uplift because it's still Black History Month, and I think it's important to remind people, really not just this month, but every month, that slavery never ended, and it's actually still legal because the 13th Amendment dictates that slavery is illegal, except in the case of a crime being committed, which means that prison slave labor is totally 100% legal according to the Constitution of the United States.
And since this is Promote Other Podcast Day, on this episode, last episode of Government Secrets, I discussed how tipping actually comes from slavery, and that's why it's far more common in the U.S. than other countries.
Yeah, that's...
The tipping culture and keeping people down to $2.13, the sub-minimum wage.
Which you made a good point. Like, what the fuck is sub minimum? How can
minimum
you be sub
means
minimum?
Least.
Right.
That's the least. Yeah.
So Alan McLeod reports that America's largest companies are increasingly profiting from prison industrial Let me that sentence lost it.
Sorry. Rewind.
The U.S.'s largest arms manufacturers are relying on coerced prison labor because guess what? That it bolsters your bottom line when you don't have to pay for labor. I think the slave owners of old knew this as well, right?
I mean, and if there was one industry I would think is unlikely to care how their workers are treated, I'd go with weapons industry.
Yeah. So a study of the 100 largest private Defense Department contractors found that 37% of them were profiting from incarcerated Americans, either in prisons and jails or in ICE camps.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So 16 of the top 25 largest arms manufacturers, including Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman, are in on that. So 16 of the top 25 largest. And this really speaks to the fact that, how do you get to be one of the top fucking arms manufacturers in the country? Well, you use slave labor, right?
Right.
And this is, of course, something that the old slave owners of old could have told you. That bolsters your bottom line, so you can continue to grow and become one of the biggest arms manufacturers in the country and in the world.
I'm hoping prisoners aren't making like Tomahawk missiles or anything, because I think I know how they could escape from prison.
Yeah, they're rolling MRAPs through the mess hall, and
no, I'm sure there's plenty of parts that can be made that are not ballistic and shit like that, but yeah, which they're forcing, obviously, essentially prison slaves to make.
Well, and so basically, this includes like making electronics, harness and optical equipment. Things that are like parts of larger, weapons. And so, for instance, they
signs that say Ayatollah Asahola, that type of thing.
But the weaving there is very intricate. It's very nicely done.
I got that line from The Simpsons where Homer's trying to sell a jacket that says that at a yard sale, and he goes, "It works for any Ayatollah."
Dude, The Simpsons. For instance, there's prisoners making pieces for a Bradley fighting vehicle, which sounds kind of like a Fisher-Price toy, but it's this huge, massive piece of equipment that the U.S. Army uses. And for this work, prisoners have reportedly been receiving, drumroll please, $100 a month.
There you go, raking it in.
And these are weapons that are that cost like the U.S. government millions and billions of dollars to these contractors, to these arms manufacturers. And so basically what you have happening is that these big companies like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and shit are getting bank to build these.
And sell them to places like Saudi Arabia.
Right. And are making all of that profit because literally they're paying slave wages to have them constructed.
God bless America, where at least I know I'm free.
Yeah. And that's,
Not so much.
Not so much. So also something that Alan McLeod highlights is that a lot of other corporations also profit from prison labor, not least of all AT&T. Another one that he highlights is CACI International, and it's like an IT company. And one of the things that Alan points out is that we wouldn't consider, for instance, AT&T to be an arms, like a weapons industry corporation, but we really have to start broadening who we think of as part of the military-industrial complex, because AT&T does work with the U.S. government.
Right.
And so on like military shit. So it's important that we consider that, yes, obviously the military industrial complex includes people who are literally making fucking missiles and MRAPs and tanks and shit, but it's also the people that are making these IT systems, making the communication systems and all of this shit that is an integral part of the military industrial complex. So it's a lot broader than just like, it's not like 1918 anymore. It's not just fucking guns.
Yeah.
It is a
technology.
lot. Yeah. It's because really the cutting edge of technology in the United States is military. They are the ones that get the first dibs at all of this new technology that's researched because that we are a military empire.
We're an oil company with an army.
So said George Carlin. So yeah, an important thing to consider, so that we don't just think of like arms manufacturers as being the ones using prison labor and working with the military industrial complex. So Verizon, IBM, AT&T, Microsoft, et cetera, these are big players in the military industrial complex. And for more about this topic, you can check out Alan McLeod's piece that's titled 1 in 3 Big Defense Contractors Profit from U.S. Prisoner Suffering, and that you can find via Mint Press News and radindymedia.com.
Radindymedia.com. You guys should all sign up for the email list so you get daily emails with the top independent stories, the antidote for your corporate media garbage. You would definitely understand more of what's happening in Ukraine right now if you read some of the articles at radindymedia.com.
So wrapping up today, I want to finish with, this is actually it's like a pretty good news story. It's an upswing.
Before we do the pretty good news story,
Yes.
can I just tell some people some quick housekeeping things?
Housekeeping?
I want to say the next line, but I suppose without telling people it's from Tommy Boy, you might be confused.
That's true. If you just start quoting shit without...
David Spade knocks on his door and goes, "Housekeeping, want me jack you off?" And Chris Farley's like, "What the hell?
What kind of place is this?
What kind of place is this?" But anyway,
go watch that movie if you have not.
Anyway, some quick notes before we get to the last story. Radindymedia.com, we already mentioned. There's obviously new stuff on Redacted tonight. That's at leecamp.com. I have my interview with Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. You have heard of him, and he is also a great activist. So we talked about Assange and Donziger and Palestine, and wonderful interview, if I do say so myself. And that's at leecamp.com and radindymedia.com as well. Let's see, what else? Eleanor's album, the vinyl album, you can grab that and get it. Every copy is signed and exclusive. It's a VIP album.
It's exclusive.
It's a VIP album. So get the vinyl. You really should. It's amazing, especially if you like the theme song to this show.
It's at artkillingapathy.com.
Oh, did I not say that? Oops.
Oh, you might have. I
probably didn't. I'm sorry. And then if you think you got, we have one more story coming, but if you think you've gotten $1 worth out of this show, please go to liberapay.com/leecamp, liberapay.com/leecamp. We have no ads or anything on this show. You guys keep it going. You are the only reason it keeps going. So thank you so much. All right. Now let's get to that final story.
So when I say the word Atlanta, you probably don't think forest. But Atlanta is a city in a forest, as they say, and they being the people that are in this article. And I guess you could say that about most of the Eastern Seaboard, because most of the Eastern Seaboard used to be lush forests that fucking colonizers decimated. So you're welcome. Today in history. There is a movement working to defend the Atlanta forest, aka Stop Cop City. This is another story that has been a recent interview that was done by It's Going Down, which you can also find on radindymedia.com. They did a great interview with folks who are part of this movement. And basically the broad strokes here, as It's Going Down reports, what happens when cops, developers, and Hollywood team up to decimate some of the very woods the city claims to treasure. In the last year, a widespread and diverse movement has sprung up to defend the Atlanta forest, from a secretive proposal to, get this, build a police training facility flanked by a movie soundstage in a wooded parcel in southeast Atlanta.
For those who don't know, Atlanta has become a main place that Hollywood films movies because they get massive tax breaks. Mm-hmm. You know, it's basically like if you go there, they won't charge you anything for anything. So...
And it's like increasingly expensive to film in places like LA and New York. So, Hey, Atlanta's the Hollywood of the South, as some are calling it. So basically, folks are saying that like this is a unique fight, but it also speaks to the intersections, not just in terms of the intersections, on the side of pushing for justice, the intersections of defending ecosystems, also going against the police state, but also intersections in the police state in and of itself. Hollywood has a very deep and cozy relationship with the police state, and of course the military that we just mentioned. The Pentagon has like an entire wing that is just dedicated to quote unquote consulting with Hollywood about how the army and military are portrayed in films.
And it's almost impossible to get a large, and most movies that even have few scenes involving military are large. So to get a large movie about the military filmed is nearly impossible without the Pentagon working with you, because they offer up all the resources, uniforms, guns, everything.
Right.
And so therefore they have basically final say on the script. So that is why you almost without exception, there's like a couple from the 90s, but you almost never see a movie that is truly kind of anti-military. Anti-military, anti-war.
And so the folks that are interviewed in this piece mentioned the connectivity that police, that Hollywood, that gentrification, and the systemic racism that's inherent in all three of those are part and parcel of the same process of, funneling profits to the big corporations away from communities, and also funneling them to police and military as opposed to communities. And one thing that I think is particularly, and you can read the entire interview. I'm not going to obviously read it to you. It's not story time, kids. But I think that one thing that is in particular so fucking cool about this current fight is how people are being in relationship with the forest. So I'm just going to read a couple of quotes here. Quote, because of gentrification in the city, the DIY scenes, like the music scenes, have lost a lot of spaces that they depended on. As a result, because of overlapping networks, the forest became kind of a regular site for shows and parties. So when people in the DIY scene need a venue, they just do them here. That didn't exist before the movement. And that's part of why we've encouraged a lot of different types of participation. We don't direct people to participate in any particular way, so we often meet people we've never seen before in our lives organizing ecological walks or organizing massive parties in the forest. People have a lot of freedom to interact with the forest in ways that make sense to them. And I just, this makes my whole body tingle with joy because it's so fucking rad.
Yeah.
And it's so perfect, because this really speaks to the fluid and emergent ways that we can think of protecting and defending what we love, defending our communities. It's not just about hey, I'm going to go out there and stand in front of the trees, which is awesome. But it's I'm going to hold space by having a fucking concert.
Right.
I'm going to protect and hold space by doing an ecological walk and teaching people about foraging mushrooms or whatever the fuck. Or hey, here's this weird bird that I found. There are so many ways to protect and be in relationship with the space that also fosters people to learn to love. Because, we talk about defend what you love, but the love gets lost a lot in these conversations about the need to defend and protect. And it's so important to remember that love is really the important part of that sentence, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're not going to be moved to defend and protect something that you kind of feel meh about. It's not defend what you it's defend what you love. And that is a really powerful verb. And so how do you fall in love with something that the entire system has taught you is just a commodity? How do you fall in love with something and learn that you are inextricably linked to these trees, to the fucking mycelium networks that rush under your feet? How the fuck do you learn to be in community with that? Well, however you feel drawn to. If you feel drawn to music, if you feel drawn to going on walks, if you feel drawn to sitting under a fucking tree and reading a book, this is so fucking cool, the way that people are engaging with the forest in ways that teach us to love it and be a part of it. And therefore, when somebody threatens it, particularly to build a fucking training facility for cops, you're oh, fuck no. Because this is now a very important part of my life. It's not just about some trees. It's about a community space and about a community of people and ecosystems. And I just think that is so fucking cool.
Very well said.
And so people can connect with the folks that are doing this work. You can check out the movement Defend the Atlanta Forest on Instagram to get updates. They are continuously doing events and trainings and things like that. So if you're in the area, like, please check it out because it's very much open to people who want to come in and support. And the status update is that they haven't started construction on the training facility as of yet. They've done a lot of work that they need to do in order to start construction, but it's preliminary work. And so the folks in the interview made it clear that this is a young movement that has a long future ahead of it. So there's a lot of spaces and ways for folks to get involved. So check that out. And wherever you are, there is probably something comparable happening in your area, and I think this is a great invitation to find new ways to be with our ecosystems.
Amen to that. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. By the way, if you're in Washington, D.C. or near Washington, D.C., we're part of a live show coming up this Sunday, February 27th at Tabard Inn. I believe it starts at 6:30 p.m. It's a countdown for Assange's Freedom show put together by Randy Credico. And I believe to get tickets, from what I hear, the only way to get tickets is to email AssangeCountdown@gmail.com. That's AssangeCountdown@gmail.com, and say you want tickets to this show. It is me performing comedy. Eleanor will be performing music. Randy Credico doing comedy and hosting. You have everybody from the Redacted cast. Jafar Khan, Andrews Lee, Naomi Caravani doing comedy. Marianne Williamson will be speaking. And Margaret Kunstler will be speaking. And I believe a few others as well. So if you want to be a part of this show and come hang out with us, that would be cool. It's an intimate room. It's a small gathering, but should be a good time.
And it'll also be live streamed. I just tweeted out that information. So if you can't join us, you can join us virtually. On that note, everyone.
Thank you, guys, and keep fighting.
Stay safe. Act out.